Hey friends, as we're now entering the primary stages of Elbaph and more or less the whole storyline has been set into motion, it's kind of given me pause to wonder exactly one thing. What is Luffy going to do on Elbaph? To help answer that question, I've decided to lay this out in an internet-friendly list. So, beginning with number 1, Odd Knights primarily will fight the other Straw Hat crew members. I know it's quite common in this series for us to depend on the monster trio to fight most of our battles, but if anything, these initial first few battles and encounters really has emphasized that this arc is really about building up the rest of the Straw Hat crew, not about those three. And that kind of makes a lot of sense because many people have not complained but observed for a while that those characters always seem to come in far below the three primary members, and if we're going into the end of the series, everyone needs a major power boost. Number 2, we're going to find out more about the history of Elbaph, with Loki, in particular his father, and the nature of what their relationship was with the world government. This has been teased a couple times and it's not going away, so I assume this will get divulged later. And lastly, and number 3, I get the feeling that this is going to be distinctively the main setup for launching us into the end of the series. I think we're going to hit some major events throughout the end of Elbaph, regardless of whether that spirals out into multiple little segments or straight out into the buildup of the final war. It's going to essentially be the kickoff point for this. Whether this is us going to find the One Piece or us going to save Garp, it doesn't really matter. And the funny thing about that is that last item only encompasses the end of Elbaph. The other two are what's going to be going on with it, and for very obvious reasons, Luffy cannot help his crew. Hats have become dependent on the idea of Luffy always showing up to save them. Substitute Luffy with Zoro or Sanji on occasion. They can't have that now. They cannot have that constant reliance that somebody is going to come and save them. They have to upgrade themselves. So for the duration of this arc, we're going to see Luffy, and I believe the other two members of the monster trio, kind of get shoved into the corner for most of this. They're not going to get to fight the God Knights. They're not going to get to do anything too major. As a matter of fact, it was the second item that I think they will have the most interaction with. Truth be told, I think they are going to interact with the backstory of Loki the most. And understanding that that doesn't just encompass what happened to his father and why he ended up with the devil fruit he has, not that we even necessarily know what that is, but also the fact that how this ties into the greater history of Elbaph, and even his history with the Rocks pirates are all going to be important. I feel like this is supposed to tie a couple of threads together. Now, the greatest irony of this is the person here who's most likely to understand all of it is Sanji, so it's kind of funny that this is really more of a section that Robin or Nami or even Jinbei would be better to comprehend, but also at the end of the day, I think this will be somewhat understandable to all of them at the very least, and at most, it's going to be a big conversion point for whether or not Loki will either be a final enemy or a final ally for the Straw Hats. Either way, it's going to serve its primary purpose of keeping Luffy off the board. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think Luffy will do nothing during Elbaph. There will be some conflict for them to deal with. I don't know if Loki's going to get back up and fight them, or if perhaps another God Knight is going to show up to try and challenge them, and that could be that specific section. Now, I do get the feeling that there are some pair-offs throughout this whole ordeal that are designed to push more Straw Hats than others. Robin getting paired up against Summers, for example, is a fairly obvious one that many people have noted. As for who's going to end up beating Gunko or not, I have no idea. And then there's Killingham, who's currently not facing off against any of the Straw Hats. So if I had to place a running bet on that one, I get the feeling he is supposed to be for Usopp, because there's a whole thing about Kirin in their mythology being like truth detectors, and Usopp is a notorious liar. Of course, this does mean that not all of the Straw Hats are going to get epic fight segments or upgrades necessarily from this, though this is going to push some others in certain ways. Obviously, I think Frankie's going to use that ancient technology they found to upgrade himself, so on and so forth. And understand, I do think there's a distinctive possibility that towards the end of this arc, what we might see is that as the Celestial Knights get more and more desperate, what we might see is they might summon more backup. In particular, it could be Shanks' brother, it could be somebody underneath him. Whatever it ends up being, that is where I think we might see the monster trio reemerge, possibly with Loki as an ally. After all, these Celestial Knights are designed to push the regular Straw Hats. Anybody else like a captain level character per se in that ranking would be too much for them even with upgrades. So we could very well see some like last minute save coming from this in the form of Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji showing up when somebody too powerful shows up. And of course, it's also important to understand that just because Luffy is going to be relegated to talking with or fighting with Loki to understand him more in this section, doesn't mean he's not going to get anything out of it. If anything, I think it's really interesting to compare and contrast how he could be similar and different to Rocks. Because, you know, we draw a lot of comparisons to Luffy with Roger, but the interesting thing is we know such little about Rocks other than he was a student of history. He was not generally well liked by anybody that knew him, his own crew especially. And on top of that, he is a D member, but seems to be almost in total contrast to most of them, similar to Blackbeard. In many ways, we might use this as a way to learn and compare contrast with how Rocks was to Roger, the way that Roger is to Luffy. So does that mean we might see some more Blackbeard parallels in this? Possibly. I've made videos before about how I don't think this arc is going to be very combat intensive for Luffy, and honestly, as this is shaping up, I think that still holds true. Does not mean it will not be important for him though. If you like discussions like this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel because I have plenty more coming up.